Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm Tracy Fessenden. I'm based here at the center. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's lecture by Peter Coviello titled, Is There God After Prince? Icons in an Age of Last Things. Pete's lecture is this year's lecture in the Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Speaker Series on religion and conflict, and it's also part of the Center's Spirituality and Public Life initiative. Before we get started, as usual, we have a little bookkeeping. Please take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phones. Today's event is being live streamed, so we'd like to offer a warm welcome to our digital audience. And for those joining us in person, I invite you to join us for a light reception after the event. If you anticipate any difficulty hearing the talk, we invite you to sit in the back of the room by the PA system where the sound is most amplified. If during the lecture you have a difficult time hearing the speaker or require any assistance, please look for our events coordinator, Alex Brooks, and wave to her, and we will take care of you. In addition to today's lecture, we have another wonderful event coming up on Thursday, May 2nd at 3 p.m. in the Pima Auditorium over at the MU. Ruth Ben-Ghiat will visit the center for an event titled Assaults on Truth and Democracy in 2024. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is professor of history and Italian studies at New York University and an expert on fascism and authoritarian leaders. One of her most recent books is called Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present. Both last week's event with Kathleen Ballou and the upcoming event with Ruth Ben-Ghiat are part of the Center's Recovering Truth, Religion, Journalism, and Democracy in a Post-Truth Era project. As always, information about future events can be found on our website, and you can follow us as well on Facebook, Twitter/X, Instagram, and YouTube. So I want to thank our donors. As I mentioned, our lecture is part of the Center's Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Speaker Series on Religion and Conflict. As dear friends of the Center, the Marshalls endowed this speaker series at our center because it reflected their longstanding concerns to promote peaceful solutions to pressing conflicts in our world. This event is also part of the Center's Spirituality and Public Life initiative, made possible by a generous donation to the Center by our dear friend, Penny Davis. The initiative highlights the importance of spirituality to the ethical formation of persons and citizens and to institutions of public life that are vital to human flourishing. We are so very grateful to Penny for her generosity and her vision, which make it possible for us to welcome Pete Coviello today, as well as a few other things I'll share with you in a minute. When we pool our resources together, we're able to do great things for our students, our faculty, and for our community. So I want to thank all of you who have became friends of the Center or renewed your friendship with the Center this year. Before I introduce our speaker, I want briefly to share a few other successes from our Spirituality and Public Life initiative. We started as a curricular initiative with modest goals. We wanted to create 2 courses about spirituality and get them into the ASU catalog as regular offerings. And as ASU folks here may know, the system for doing this is impossibly cumbersome, unpredictable, and Byzantine. We were prepared for this, but no sooner had we begun our process than the system that had been in place for decades was overhauled and replaced with an entirely new system, only slightly less Baroque, just as unpredictable. But just this week we got word that we had successfully traversed the bureaucratic maze and both of our courses were approved. And as Peter Coviello might say, that is not nothing. So we hope that these will be the first 2 courses of many more in spirituality. And this is good for our students and good for our faculty. We are ahead of the curve in that most schools don't offer these kinds of courses, but we are also playing catch up. You've heard the statistics. 1 in 4 Americans identify as spiritual, not religious. For our students, I would say it's even higher. And if you polled them, you would find that they are very interested in spirituality. They are not so interested in religion. Many, if not most, of the religious studies scholars that I came up with were not trained to think or write or teach about spirituality. In fact, we learned to dismiss spirituality as watered-down religion or New Age hocus pocus. Our students and the culture all around us are telling us that we need to do better and that we have much more to learn, particularly from those spaces and places where religion, not spirituality, is the weaker term in the pair, where religion is a colonial or missionary imposition, relatively recent, and spirituality, the stronger and more enduring force, or where folks are pretty much done with religion for a whole host of reasons, but still want very much to lead spiritually meaningful lives. So over the next day and a half, this is how the Spirituality and Public Life Initiative has grown. Over the next day and a half, a bunch of us are meeting to talk about enlivening the study of spirituality, and we have 15 extraordinary scholars visiting us from all over the US and Canada, many of whom braved snowstorms and tornado warnings to get on a plane in the wee hours of this morning to be with us today. So thank you so much for being here. We are going to be talking as a group tomorrow about spiritually charged persons, places, and things as a way into the study of spirituality. Iconic figures who move us or haunt us or draw us near to them and compel our devotion. And Peter Coviello is here to set the bar by talking with us about Prince, and we are so honored to have him today. Peter Coviello is professor and head of English at University of Illinois, Chicago. As a scholar of American literature and queer theory, Pete's work addresses the entangled histories of sex, devotion, and intimate life in modernity. He also publishes and teaches in the areas of religion and secularism, gender studies, poetry and poetics, and creative nonfiction. He is the author of 6 books, including Make Yourselves Gods, a finalist for the 2020 John Whitmer Historical Association Best Book Prize, and Long Players, a memoir selected as one of Art Forum's best books of 2018. His most recent book, which shares the title with this lecture, was selected for the Millions Most Anticipated list for 2023. This compilation of essays, Is There God After Prince?, explores what it means to love things, literature, songs, people, in calamitous times, when so much seems to be shambling toward collapse. Pete is one of the most vibrant and exciting scholars I know, one of the most vibrant and electric thinkers I know. So I assure you that we are in for a treat. Please join me in welcoming Peter Coviello.
Thank you all very much. I'm taking the advice of my friend Will, and I'm just going to keep drinking water for the whole time. Also, as you hear, we're going to have some music. I'm thinking of this as kind of walk-up music. But what I really want to say is thank you all so much for being here. It's a tremendous honor to be here, largely with Tracy, who I admire and whose facility I envy so much. Just when Will and I, my colleague Will, who is your colleague as well, we were walking through the hall, and we saw all these names of people who I also revere and admire. Linnell Katie, Joan Scott, Molly McGarry, all these people who study religion in ways that I've wanted I've aspired to. So I'm very, very honored to be here. So a few words in preface. One is that I'm going to talk for probably 35 or 40 minutes, depending on how digressive I become. Just in preface about what I want to do today, which is speak some across audiences to students of religion, of criticism and theory, of music, as well as fans of fiction and poetry, and especially to people whose more general ambition is just to write. I'll say that I have an outsized admiration for that ambition in its many and varied manifestations. My own career has been marked by a certain, you might say, restlessness, which I'd prefer to think of as curiosity. I've written scholarly books and theory-ish books and history-ish books, but also a lot of essays, personal and otherwise, a memoir of all things, and other sorts of stuff that have ranged more or less feral from the professionally academic to the totally generalist and to many spots in between. And I want to say by way of preface that this happened for really the simplest of reasons, which is that some time ago, like years into a career that was basically focused on like 19th century American literature and queer studies, I started to write in an unaccustomed way. I became interested, in seeing what different sorts of voice might be found on the page in the work of critical appraisal and explication. That was really it. I could dress that up in a fancier way, but that was really it. And the motives here were quite unexceptional, probably like a lot of you. I learned how to love the things that I love, ideas, bands, books, people, in concert with other people, overwhelmingly in concert with other people, with the friends that I talked with and fought with and disagreed with, and together created a kind of a language with. And indeed, that's kind of how I learned what falling in love with your friends was like, actually. You talk with great vehemence and ardor, and you create together a language, and that kind of love-struck and over-ardent talking seemed to me to have clarifying energies of its own. And so I wanted to get something of its vernacular sharpness into writing. And that's a thing that I've tried for the last decade or so, tried my hand at, just really to see, not as against professional academic criticism. I'm a professional academic, and I have great reverence for that endeavor. I just want to see what it might be like to speak in a different kind of voice and see what clarities you'd find there. I've just finished this book, and it means to speak up for criticism in a certain mode. Promiscuous in attention, prone to overheating, in the agitated vernacular, and wrought round with the interwoven dilemmas of worldly grief, local sorrow, ordinary blindsiding joy. That, give or take, is the prevailing mode. There are essays that try to make a case for a criticism that's as companionable, as alive to like the homely intensities of love and of sorrow as it is conceptually exacting. And it's made up of essays, which are shortish bursts of ardor and appraisal intertwining with life. So I want to share with you a little bit of that today, mostly from the title essay, and to get at some of the substance of the book, a book that it's fair to say is most fundamentally about what it can mean to love what we love. As Tracy said, art, songs, poems, novels, your friends, your children, your lovers, in what I'll just frankly call a time of ruin and collapse, of planet-sized calamity. What I've said, I'm coming to the end of touring on the book, and what I found myself saying a lot is it's a basically downhearted book about joy. And that's what I think is right. So with that, I hope you'll let me begin, and I'd like to start with let me tell you a story. So, it's the Maine midwinter, hard frozen and dark. I am trying to live through it as best I can, but it's not going entirely well. I am in the first place a newish arrival to this place, to Maine, which means that I am considerably less fluent in the protocols of madness deflection than I might be. But I am also, in my newness to this place, another kind of unsteadied. I have been actually employed as an actual professor at an actual college for about 6 months. And not for a moment have I been free of the sense of an imminent, disastrous exposure. Perhaps it's a function of being in your first job to make you feel an obvious fraud. Some of you will identify with this. Whatever the case, and whatever my cross-cutting elation at having any kind of job at all, adult professional life is for me a precarious sort of performance, brittle and unconvincing. I am 27 years old. It is inevitably 1999. But then, from deep in some yet unfrozen reservoir of optimism, a decision comes to me, a fateful decision. I decide that I will have a party. I decide that I will have a dance party. I decide to send an email to most every person I've met and to many others that I haven't in Maine. And it reads, please come to my apartment on Cleveland Street for a party celebrating the 15th anniversary of Purple Rain. Any and all non-minors welcome. And so, on a February night at the back end of the Clinton era, a bunch of wanderers marooned in a sleepy New England college town together conspire to beguile an evening with whiskey and talk and many hours of in-house dancing in an underfurnished, overheating living room, books piled in listing towers, boots and coats stacked in a jumble in the corner. I remember looking around me and seeing even the starchiest of my daylight colleagues and fledgling friends now sweat-soaked and giddy, teetering toward a Prince-induced euphoria. And I remember thinking, oh, I can live here. Among the semi-acquaintances to show that night in 1999, one makes a special impression. She was the friend of friends and has come out ready to dance, despite the fact that she is, I know, in the latter days of what has been a slow-moving and hard divorce. Her ex, I imagine, has the kids for the night. I tell her I'm glad she came. Later I'll say, you walked in, I woke up. And for years and years after, every midwinter, we'd throw dance parties. Though these were a few blocks away, in the home that she and I and her girls made for ourselves after we were married, our friends knew these as Purple Rain nights or just Prince parties. So, a few summers ago, a friend in England scored tickets to one of those impromptu solo gigs Prince had taken to performing, which you remember when he would just play solo gigs that he would announce 4 days before. Despite what was for me near fatal onset of envy, or perhaps in order to express that envy, I wrote her a series of badgering emails. Tell me about the show. What was it like? What was it like? Her response was memorable. It was unlanguageable, she said. Also, I think I might be pregnant. It's still great. That's like music criticism should be that email from my friend. In a similar, sadder way, Prince's actual death, that awful blindsiding tear in the fabric of things, is unlanguageable. There is, of course, the routinely undoing power of grief in response to deaths, no matter how mediated, and this is, God knows, an impressive quantity. And there is, too, the familiar drift of our metaphors in sorrow out toward the terrain of measure and measurelessness, the too huge influence, the too many songs, the too proliferating memories, the too great quantities of joy. I am with you, fellow grievers, in all this. When I found out, I was in a coffee shop in Chicago, texting with a friend. I stood for about 10 minutes on the corner of Clark and Foster, weepy and paralyzed, unable to imagine what to do next. Was there eating lunch after Prince? After Prince, would we talk on the phone? Would we take trains? Was there sex after Prince? So, today, I want to say just a small word about this and its particular burden of the unassimilable. I want to suggest to you that Prince is hard to grieve because he is, in an only barely not literal sense, divine, in a way that I hope to explain for a little bit. I want to say that the categories that most attend him and that the light of his person illuminates are not those made by the hands of men. I want to say that for nearly 40 years, Prince served as among our greatest explicitly religious visionaries, the one most devoted not only to God, but to heterodoxy, heresy, blasphemy, to all that, in these latter days of privatized belief and well-bred spirituality, lends to the realm of religion whatever ongoing vitality it has. I want to say that Prince is an icon, and that he is so, I just will suggest, in what seems to me a particularly illuminating way. He reveals to us, I think, that at least part of the office of the icon is to be a herald of the inapprehensible. One way, only one among many others that we'll talk about amongst ourselves, I'm sure, one way to grasp our icons, in other words, is as figures who in their works and in their persons butt up hard against the framing confinements of speech, convention, conception, against the very edges of what in the ordinary run of things is thinkable, and who then, for a flashing instant, make sensible to us the outlines of an entire other world, so that we might hold it there before us in our semi-ravished bodies before it evanesces back toward oblivion. That's what I want to say about Prince's iconicity. But fair warning, I want to say too, that if the icon is a herald of possibilities lying just beyond the secular perimeter of the merely knowable, if the icon in this way carries around within it another zone of imaginability, and if Prince forever reminds us how incandescent and joyful it can be inside such precincts, it's worth recognizing too what desolating possibilities reside there as well. All manner of things find us through our icons, those talismanic conduits to the inconceivable. To be a harbinger of the glimpsed but not quite known, the not quite languageable, I want to say that that is not just at this moment in both locally political and unlocally planetary time, that it's not an office whose sole currency is joy. Think. just for a moment, think about the things that today we both know, sort of, but simultaneously cannot quite conceive. Think how such things are now so routinely freighted with intimations of an onrushing and planet-scaled human ruin, a thing foreknown but also not quite fully thinkable. Think those things and you'll have some sense of what I mean in respect to this rather negative kind of iconicity, but more on that later. For now, today, what I most wish to propose is that Prince brings the inapprehensible and the homely into a contact so vivid, so carnally vital, so far beyond argument or the possibility of contradiction that every time you hear it, you are transported anew in a rush of ever juvenile astonishment. That, I will be suggesting to you, is the substance of what might be called his spiritual power. Two quick caveats about his spiritual power, the phrase his spiritual power. One is I won't be talking in great detail about like the religious surround of Prince. I won't be talking about the particular Seventh-day Adventist and Baptist intensities fraught through the Oedipal prism that they come to Prince in, nor the secular Protestant surround of club life. I won't be talking about the sort of turn into the Jehovah's Witness conversion, nor even like Prince's interest in like Catholicism and its transgressive possibilities. All of these languages, by the way, I learned from Professor Fessenden thinking about Billie Holiday, I'd want to say. I'll be thinking rather about a kind of syncretism that we find in his music. The second caveat follows a bit what Tracy just said. I want to confess to you with all frankness that I find in myself, as a scholar of a certain age, some misgiving in respect to the entire notion of spiritual power. I am enough of a student of post-secular critique, these are my people, to look rather askance at spirituality as such, to wonder if it is ultimately and necessarily yet another one of those somewhat untrustworthy concepts, manufactured all too entirely within the heavy machinery of secular distinction. To doubt that it can ever be anything other than a second-order byproduct, a thing created all too precisely as the saving, if rather saccharine antidote to the supposed aridity of secular disenchantment. That's that's where I am as a scholar in a lot of ways. These are my misgivings, I offer them to you. Let me add that I am rarely less in the grip of them, less armored with conceptual refusal than when I am listening to Prince, which is to suggest that I would want to claim Prince as among the least secular rock stars the world has ever known. So let me explain. Another track. The greatest sentence I ever heard spoken about Prince was spoken by my friend Gus, a guy named Gus Stadler, who was on a panel. It was a panel about cover songs. And he was discussing what Prince's just soul-blinding cover of Joni Mitchell's Case of You. Which is just sick. That's its. Prince loved Joni Mitchell. Like, now I'm sidebarring. Like, yes, Prince is like, he weds Little Richard to Jimi Hendrix to Stevie Wonder melody. He also gets rock and roll. He's so Mick and Keith, and he just draws up. He's also Gloria Gaynor. He's disco, but he's also a singer-songwriter. Like all of that. And this is the most singer-songwriter moment. Anyway, Gus said, to get at the magic of the song, you had to understand that so much of the shivery, erotic power of Prince depends upon a kind of inconceivability. A sense of Prince as not so much a being apart, but as a being at once here with us and inhabiting in simultaneity some world unfathomably other to ourselves. Prince's spare version, he said, is so perfect, so airtight, that its sexiness comes from a wholly different place, a place no one has ever been except while listening to Prince. God, did I love this. I remember this being like, yes. He would go on to say, what do you think Prince wore while he was recording this? If I were his girlfriend, would he let me dress him? I, at least, don't believe such questions have answers. I just loved the whole thing, Gus Stadler. I remember hearing it and thinking that nothing else I knew had put a finger so deftly upon the way so much about Prince could shade off toward, or rather ascend into, a sublime otherworldliness. It could be flaky, this otherworldliness, or funny, or bewildering, or as like loving burlesques like Dave Chappelle's, which some of you will remember, made very vivid, just like super weird, just wonderfully, wonderfully weird. You were silly like us, I would think. But then, as in case of you, it could seem like a bottled up dose of enchantment itself. A thing beamed in from a dimension barely imaginable, adjacent to the world where a different sort of gravity and physics prevailed. You have listened to Prince. You know the wondering hiccup of thought, the sort of mind-sputtering joy that I mean. We're trying to think about Prince and something, I actually can't think all the way through that. All of the things I'm saying, making kin to Bowie, of course, with his shifting intergalactic personae, as well as to cosmically minded Afrofuturists like Sun Ra, Grace Jones, George Clinton, also intensely in his way Hendrix. But I want to suggest that Prince isn't cosmic exactly, or not in the same way as Bowie or Jones. His otherworldliness is not that of an alien, a sci-fi visitant. It is rather the otherworldliness of someone very much of this world, but the whole of whose person seems italicized by, given substance through, a set of animating principles quite entirely apart from the world of mortal life. Now you can see this. I love this picture so much. We were speaking of it earlier. You can see this inner attunement, this call of an organizing otherwise everywhere in the archive of Prince. Think of the zone of impermeable privacy he creates around himself on stage, but also in song. I would say there has never, to my mind, been a male singer who's made more of coyness, of a flirtatious recessiveness and withholding. You could think of the song as it would Ballad of Dorothy Parker, when Dorothy Parker wants him to get in the bath and he says, cool, but I'm keeping my pants on because I'm kind of going with somebody. It kills. You could just think of the absolutely unrivaled power of his hotness. Everyone knows that Prince is a miracle of transitivity, invoking, then bewildering, all the nearest idioms of race, sex, genre, gender, time. Think of his hotly feminized masculinity, his queer blackness that is also straightness, the one that remains indelibly queer, his blackness and his maleness and his straightness and his queerness, all these roles like the sexiest Emersonian in the history of the world. He endeavors, as Emerson says, to embody after a new and unprecedented way. Stop, well, you can't do this now, but stop whatever you're doing when you go home and look up the video of Prince performing at the goddamn halftime show of the goddamn Super Bowl in 2007. Watch him as he strides the stage, a 5-foot-something colossus in turquoise and peach. Watch the rain caress and exalt him. I ask you to truly look at the comportment of this man as he struts and leers. I want you to look at that knowingness, that grin. It is the inward smile of someone watching with serene indulgence as an entire world sets about trying to imagine a set of terms capacious enough to hold him, trying to grasp the atomic scale detonation of swagger and style and sex that is his person, and failing to do so. As I said before, and you'll forgive me for my vulgarity, look upon my works, ye mighty, that smile says. Now let's fuck. This, friends, I will suggest to you, is the otherworldliness, again, for me, the divinity of Prince. Without contempt, without pity, with louche bemusement and flirty solicitousness, he stands apart from the creaking, organizing edifices of the merely human, and its grasping, aspirational little taxonomies. These address him, but they do not adhere to him. He speaks in and as something otherwise, but something that is also deliciously near. Put on his songs, any of them. Here, they say, do you need a reminder of the exhilarating limitlessness of the world apart from the knowable and known? Here you go. Now, of course, worth saying that for many of us, the nearest name for the possibility of that luminous otherwise unfolding here within the gardens and groves of worldly life is sex. You don't have to be Freudian to think that, though it helps. This is what it means, I think, to call Prince the high priest of carnal life. No one, I want to say no one in the history of sound or creation who is not Freud, better understands the way sex is a passage to a world fantastically apart from ourselves that is also us, that inheres in us. In song after song after song, he calls us to it. The praying hands of humans, the religious historian John Modern writes in a sentence that's meant a lot to me, pray to no man, which is strange indeed, in a world in which modeling the human is the key for knowing the human, and much else beside. He is thinking here, as he often is, about what it is to live, as the phrase goes, in a secular age. And he is noting in passing that it is a hallmark of secularism to mistrust any measure of man that is not, as it were, man-made. The secular, we might say, endeavors to make the human the measure of all that is. Prince to this impulse is pure, radiant confoundment. And if this makes him a wonder, the prophet of carnal incandescence flooding the world with these bright shards of unconverted divinity that we prefer to call songs, it also makes him hard to grieve. His death is unassimilable, I think, because it partakes of the unassimilability that he has always, in that splendid otherworldliness, carried around with him. He is hard for us to grieve because grief, too, is a thing, a tool that's sort of made of and for this world. And it's a sad thought. Nothing in this world can really console us in his absence. But then, and now things get a little grim, consolation may not be the order of the day. Not right now, it seems to me. One thing to admire in new millennial living is the happy parade of fully apocalyptic facts arranged with listicle-like clarity, ever available for your stupefied contemplation. And the last, 6-8 years didn't invent this, though they have goosed up the doominess. Did you know that the scribes of the United Nations estimate 1 billion displaced persons by about 2050? 1 billion displaced persons. And that's if utterly middle-of-the-road projections in respect to warming, melt, desalinization, sea level rise holds true. 1 billion displaced persons. Did you know that global spending on what is called security, public and private, has jumped better than 15%, it's actually closer to 15% per annum in most of this, our chronically insecure century? Perhaps you recall, speaking of securitization, that great moment in Michel Foucault's Society Must Be Defended, where he observes that the security state, and this is an important part of this book, the security state, he says, is functionally a suicidal state. Or perhaps you remember the cheering reminder in the 2009 conclusion to Giovanni Arrighi's magisterial, The Long 20th Century. He's a longue durée historian of capital, where he concludes that to a far greater extent than in previous hegemonic transitions, the terminal crisis of US hegemony has been a case of great power suicide. Suicide, then, on every palsied hand. Although, it's worth observing that if suicide is one of a distinctively modern sort, by which I mean, like, do you know what the American numbers are in incarceration look like? Or life expectancies as rolled out internationally across geographies of capitalization, decapitalization, and impoverishment. It always reminds me of the old line on the serial killer, which is a joke you may have heard. He keeps trying and trying to kill himself, the state-sponsored shrink says, but it's just other people that end up dead. Anyway, that's one little cheerless area of expanding cataclysm, though you hardly need me to make such a list for you. You've got a phone, maybe a subscription to Nature, The New Yorker, none of these things, global contraction, infrastructural collapse, nominally democratic neo-fascisms clamoring to keep pace with accelerating and irreversible planetary ruin, none of these things is a matter of information, is a matter of data. No over-coded team of sleuths needs to be out there unearthing the facts, cracking this case. These are not problems of knowledge. I think about that all the time. Or not exactly. Such grim litanies, which again, forgive me, they say so little, after all, about what it's like actually to live under such conditions. So near to what the redoubtable Mike Davis, who some of you may know, in the 2 weeks before his death called in an interview an already anticipated genocide. That's how he described the century he was not going to live to see. You know, I sit on the train, phone semaphoring in my hand, or maybe I'm at the coffee shop, or maybe I'm in my office with pictures of my now 20-something stepdaughters angled toward me in mute inquiry, and there's the familiar sequence that you all will know. A noisy revving of mind, all clamor and queasy churn, and then, after this, a lapse, a sort of slow-dawning, sick-hearted nullity where thinking had been. How do we even begin to describe the frozen state of apprehension that prevails here, the style of unceasing awareness that also keeps sidestepping recognition, slipping the noose of knowing? To put it in rather old-timey terms, again borrow from Freud, how do we live with what we cannot manage to know yet do know, yet also still don't? Repression, I know, is the term of art, but I'm not sure that's right, or not exactly, or that it gets at the overwhelming simultaneity of things known and unknown, the kind of cognitively supersaturated unknowing that pulses at the terrible heart of what we might call only a little fancifully the psychic economy of Anthropocene living, where the furious coincidence of it, again, an utterly foreseen cataclysm on the one hand, and on the other, the absence of any remotely adequate response, any venue for collective mobilization available to us at the scale of the world, and its amassed and ever more impervious powers, where that coincidence makes for an especially wrenching impasse, as Lauren Berlant wrote very beautifully about the impasse, one that it seems to me we are forever filling up with sorrow and with rage and with a vast benumbed thwartedness, these three affects circulating around one another on a very short track. Here then, as promised, is the rather less cheering version of iconicity that I started with, one attuned to the spiritual power that resides in figures who compress in themselves so much that we know, but cannot bear to know, but persist in apprehending, if only in trembling intimations, bright flashes of Miltonian darkness. I've been asked a lot, why Prince? This the radiant, joyous Prince is the titular figure of a book which is so much about our relation to art and culture in like a time of half-glimpsed futurelessness and age of last things. Prince is a visionary of the inconceivable, I have replied, as it touches the quotidian, the earthly, the ordinary. And this is a book whose attention keeps turning back to the rather grimmer kind of inconceivability that I think speaks up in its shaking voice through every last aspect of the present tense ordinary, infusing all that we do and think and know with this subcurrent of unlanguageable horror. The science, the tech, the markets and the humanisms, the feature not bug inequity, the daily miraculousness, the inbuilt cruelty, hanging firmament, majestic roof, etc. The murderer's call, I like to say, has always been coming from inside the house. And all those dazzling and wonder-giving objects that we love so much, that I am super committed to, the songs that we love, the books that we love, the poems we love, to be ravished by them, it seems to me, is to know in simultaneity that they do not scale up to the disasters of the world as such. And that painful mismatch of registers invests even our most galvanizing joys with an inner pulse of sorrow of grief without horizon. Like, you listen to a song like Pink Cashmere, and it's, like Gus says, it's just perfect. It's a perfection that scales up to the sky. You feel it in, and then another part of you knows that actually it has no bearing whatsoever on the calamities of the world. And both of those things are true in simultaneity, and that seems to me a lot of the experience of contemporary life. So consolation is probably not what we're after. We are not, however, I want to say, that's not the note I'm going to be in. Thank you. Good night. We're not quite resourceless, I'll say. The day of Prince's death, an old friend contacted me, the sweetest of men, middle-aged now, like me, but with whom I had done a good deal of growing up, such as it was back in Maine. He had attended that long ago midwinter party. He had danced into and well past in sobriety. So we traded the news and we condoled. And then he said something that in a little day of implosions of heart just unraveled me. I was saying the thing that you heard about, it's unassimilable, isn't it? I know, he said, not prepared for it. Prince brought me so much joy and oddly courage. He made me less shy. And if you knew him, this dear and tender-hearted middle-aged man, and could imagine him in some like dim corner of his adolescence being heartened by a beautiful man in purple scarves wearing makeup and talking about Jesus and just shredding an inlaid pearl guitar, you too might find your heart breaking a little in happiness and sudden bereavement. I will read thousands of tributes, I told him. None will be better. Because it is hard, truly, it is hard to encounter what I've been describing to you as the otherwise inside the human. Sex is one of its forms, but it's only one of them. There is, as I've tried to suggest, a ruinousness sleeping inside the inapprehensible, so that approaching it requires not only the blissed-out surrender of aesthetic happiness, but fortitude, solidity, a devotional patience. And it's frightening to move toward it, to stay attached to life, to stay attached to this, the scene of our sorrow and grieving and joy and struggle and togetherness. That actually takes courage. But you know, there are these songs. There are these songs. The world beyond the world, they say. Oh, that is nothing less and nothing more than this thing called life. And then, with a generosity not much in the despoiled sublunary sphere can match, they invite you into it. In these little passages of turbulent grace, here it is. Any of Prince's songs, here it is, they say, here it is. You'll find it in the rhythm and the harmony. You'll find it in the lewd beauty of the funk, in the delirious inconceivabilities of sex. You'll find it on the 2, the 4, the 1, the 3, the groove so funky it's on the run, the guitar that gently weeps, the voice of the man who only wants to see you laughing. We're out with that. Thanks. What better? You want to just end? My whole life, I think I've wanted to end to close a thing with Purple Rain playing. Yeah, and we're going to keep that up. That's Prince at 19. How awesome is that? Yeah. I hope we have time for questions.
Do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I just I want to say a few things. People have heard me talk about Pete Coviello. Now you know. Now you know why I love Pete Coviello. In a compliment I'll crib from another person we both love. Listening to Pete Coviello makes listening to or reading Pete Coviello's scholarship. I'll put it that way. Makes reading anyone else's scholarship feel like paying your taxes. So thank you so much, Pete. We do have time for audience members to ask some questions. Please wait till you've been called on and handed a microphone to state your question, because we are streaming, and so you'll be heard if you speak into a mic, and only then. So Alex has a mic, and I have a mic as well. We can get to as many, so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Please only ask a single question as clearly and succinctly as you can.
Denunciations count as one, so you have to,
And we'd love to get to everyone's question. We might not be able to, but the floor is open.
That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Beautiful. So I know we'll we'll chat later. So I'm going to hold the comments, other than the first one, and offer a question. Prince once said, "I am sound," and it really sort of speaks to the thesis that you engage with. There is something ungraspable about sound. It cannot be captured. It can be reproduced but not captured. It's heard and felt, but it's also profoundly ambiguous and never there.
Yeah.
But we have halls to it.
Yeah.
Right? We have physical reminders of it. So in all of the ways in which you talk about the unlanguageability, the inconceivability, there's something about the way in which Prince also understood himself in that way that he evokes. And where the question I want to ask you is that there's also something about other artists that is very similar to that.
Yeah.
So I think about someone like Little Richard.
Yeah.
I think about Sade. I think about the band Radiohead, and all the ways in which these musicians are profoundly inconceivable, extremely difficult to grasp, especially Sade. Like, when will she ever reemerge for our collective benefit?
Yeah.
But there is something about artists like them, and it seems to me, given your thesis, that Prince might also be part of a group of icons, or maybe a group of saints who sort of land in this earthly world and engage and titillate and confuse us. And I just want to know, I guess, is yes, there's only one Prince, but these other icons, it seems that he might also be part of a kind of legacy.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great question. My sense is almost certainly yes. I have a far lesser facility in speaking about them. I could go some way with Little Richard, but like the exhausting and bewildering of the proximate lying around languages of apprehension. That can kick a number of ways. Emerson talks about that a lot, which is why there is and the stuff that interests me about Prince is just the particularity of it. I can't think of anyone else who's so committed to carnal life. Little Richard kind of, though, I mean, part of Little Richard's frantic ambivalence about that makes it so sexy. Prince's commitment to carnality and also to like this inapprehensible otherness makes me think of I'm an English professor, so there's a Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is writing about the hermit thrush, and she says, "This world is not conclusion. A species stands beyond, invisible as music, but positive as sound." This is another way of saying Emily Dickinson would be another person who, again, a person with greater facility than I am, would be able to produce a similar reading. But I think that's very, very correct. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. You told a great story.
Yeah, 25 years old now. Yeah.
You talk about spirit. It's a conference spirituality.
Yeah.
To reach that plane, was Prince damaged?
That's a great question. I would say I'm going to punt on it. Like, I have so little sense of I guess I'd say two things. I have a little sense of his biography. I know who his parents were. I know everything like that. And I have a wariness about linking what Freud calls the ordinary unhappiness of life to experience. Lots of people are ordinarily unhappy. Like, I've been ordinarily unhappy. I've been extraordinarily unhappy. But I never quite became Prince, though. You know what I mean? So that makes me wary of the sort of like wounded by the world vision connection, because it also takes like unbelievable will and drive and persistence, et cetera, like that. But I will say that there's a different version of this would say something about the Oedipal intensities of Prince's religious background, which was sincere but non-coincident. And I think that invested him in this particularly syncretic way in the idioms of non-secular life. But I'd also want to say, as a union person, that his parents were also super into the union. Like they're teachers union people, which I love, which I super love. When I was in Minneapolis, people wanted to. When I was in Minneapolis, you write a book like that, you give talks in Minneapolis, and people were like, it was awesome. They were like, you just knew if you lived in Minneapolis in the 80s that you were living with like Black American Mozart. And he was just a dude in town, and he would come to the record store, and you would both recognize him, but you would not get in his business. And it was just like the vibe of the town, like, we're happy you're here, we see you, you get to be you. I quite loved that. That is, I think, a way of saying that's the kind of regard I want to produce critically around the man's life, which is, yeah. But thank you for that question. What else can I tell you? Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of one, it might be easier to talk afterwards.
Okay.
It might be like a long answer.
Okay.
So, I apologize. But it's awesome that you have gotten to a point where you can explore and like study interests like Prince, like passionate things from like an academic perspective. I was wondering if you had like advice or like things that were important in your academic career for getting to this point of like, research and studentship, but for things you love, like personally.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say I really appreciate that question. It lets me say the thing like that I want to keep saying again and again. Like writing like this, which I like doing, has been having. It's not. I promise you, it's not as against scholarly writing, which is very different and requires different things. It is also thrilling. Like a couple of years ago, Good or Bad or Ill, I wrote a book about the Mormons. I didn't know anything about the Mormons. I had to learn a lot. I had to learn a lot by reading Tracy, by reading the people I was with, and like that was really exciting. I guess this book for me is a way of staying true to the way I got to like learning about ideas, which was always in a very juvenile way. Like the book is largely about juvenility and adolescence, partially because I had adolescent stepdaughters. It's about falling in love with people, like that, and that there wasn't a larger experience for me than that. Like falling in love with your friends, falling in love with the people you fell in love with. And that was so interwoven, for me, very fortunately, with ideas. Like we were talking last night about our mutual friend, a guy named John Modern. He's just a religious studies guy, whatever. But I met him, and I liked, whatever. And I just loved talking to him. And it was a way to be like, he's my friend, I love him. And that was, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like finding people that you can bring your whole self to the realm of ideas. That's all I could say. And that can express itself a million different ways, academically, non-academically, artistically, whatever. But that's like, if I'm still attached to the battered institution that is higher education, which I am, it's because it's a zone for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I teach at a super working class city school, and just to be able to say to kids, like, I know things are hard, but you get this little space to be ravished by this thing, or to be angered by this thing, or to be, and that's cool. And I learned that with stupid things, like listening to records, listening to tapes, when I was 14, 15. But I super appreciate that question. That's a great question.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah. What else can I? Yes, sir.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
should I go or you?
You go ahead. You have the mic, and then Sarah will go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect.
Sorry.
I'll keep this brief, but also just kind of opening it up to whatever you want to say. Also, cool talk. Reading this title, I was really curious what this was going to be. And I really liked what you were saying about how, like, when you're experiencing something like a beautiful Prince song, you're also holding, the planetary crisis in that same moment. And so I'm curious kind of your perspective on how icons could be possibly a way to like touch that part inside of all of us to inspire change for that crisis.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if you explore that in your scholarship at all.
I'll say and again, I'll just be super frank with you, this is not a cheerful or optimistic book. Like I don't feel a lot of cheer and optimism. Partially because I love the things that I love, like implacably fighting with people about them. And it's important to me in loving them to recognize that they are not, and they do not contain the seeds of anything that scales up to the planet. And we misapprehend them. Sometimes you need to. Sometimes when you make a case for why studying English is good. Yeah. But the problem isn't the objects. The problem is, and I'll just keep saying this, like venues of collectivity at scale. It's not anybody's knowing. It's not anybody's good-heartedness. It's not because people are mean or cruel or whatever. It's that like available venues of collectivity at scale are, for a variety of reasons that we could talk about over the last 500 years, not really available. And that like stubborn fact is a thing you can hear in things. Like there's a lot of other things to be said about like Anthropocene end timesness. Two of them that I'd want to say is like, on the one hand, I get people's impatience with like talks about the end. It's like once precarity hits middle class white people, oh, then it's a big crisis. True, 100% yes. On the other hand, I could put up the graphic about the warming of the planet by 2055. Both of those things are true. And neither of them, it seems to me, have at the moment venues for collectivity at scale. That's not a part of your insufficient willingness, your insufficient goodness of heart, that's not at that register and scale, which is where songs happen. And the mismatch in registers, I just sound like a Adorno now, the mismatch of registers now is the agony that you might feel inside aesthetic bliss. That's a too long answer, but thank you for that question. Sir, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, but by, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, a book. Has spirit in the title, so I'm
Yeah.
a little link here.
Yeah.
And it's by Robin Sylvan. Are you familiar with that book?
I don't think I am.
He traces the origin. He takes 5 forms of music: rock and roll, punk rock, hip hop, blah blah blah, and rave, and so forth.
Yeah.
And he traces. He starts in West Africa with the possession cults, and shows how this came into the Americas. And Althea Butler was standing right about where you are a couple of years ago, and I asked her, I said, do the Pentecostals in Nigeria know that the being filled with the Holy Ghost, that they brought from the United States came from them 400 years ago?
Yeah.
From the possession. And she said, her answer was kind of equivocal. It says, it's in effect, yeah, sort of.
Yeah,
I don't want to talk about it.
I'm a deep fan of the equivocal answer, like, depends on what knowing means.
Yeah.
Depends on what you'd mean
Very
by
good.
know, yeah. Which is, I appreciate that. That's a lot of what I think about now is the difficult status of knowing. Like, I'm talking to you and we know certain of things we could, among us, agree on certain facts about the world that are very dire, and we could know them. But that knowledge sits in us in a strange way. And I'm super interested. And repression is not exactly right. It's not like it's related to that. There's an Italian psychoanalyst who says, I know, but and yet. And that's a structure that I'm interested in. And that songs help me think about. Yeah. Yes, sir?
So I have a question about the way in which icon image,
Yeah.
right? Like the physicalness of it.
Yeah.
As you think about icon for music,
Yeah.
right? Is the recording the physicalness? So I am sound, right? Meaning whatever I create. It was interesting to think about live performance.
Yeah.
Versus
Which Purple Rain ends as a
correct.
live recording. Yeah.
Versus recorded, and then thinking about Prince's catalog
Yeah.
of things that are never released. So how do we, and I'm actually asking this question because I have to talk about it tomorrow.
Great, I like it. Clever, yes.
How do we think about icon in a venerated sense
Yeah.
for something that isn't physical?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm asking the question I want to ask, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking.
That's a great question. Again, the only answer I have, which is an inadequate one, like one answer wants to be like, anything about Derrida and presence and stuff like that. But another answer is like Dickinson, like invisible as music, positive as sound. And that particular distinction, which means to, like much of Dickinson, like stutter step on the divide between the material and the immaterial. That would be a thing that I would want to think about. Some things, like I have a Neapolitan family, everybody's in Naples, those are icons. They're like in the thing and they do. And this is different from that, but it's, I think, again, I would want to keep saying like it's stutter steps around any categorization as either immaterial or material. That would be my sense that I would venture somewhat hesitantly, but tomorrow we'll figure out more. Yeah. What do you think? Yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah.
Chad.
Chad.
Thanks. The talk was fantastic. I really enjoyed listening
Thanks,
to it. The question I have is one between what's the difference between religion and spirituality? And one thought
Fair.
I had, one of the many dismissive comments that Bono made was that Prince needs an editor. And so he said this. I know. Blasphemy, right? But
Literally,
it
yeah.
did make me think about how fixed and static the identities that Bono performs are within the world of evangelicalism, and such a contrast to the aesthetic of Prince.
Chad, I super agree with that.
So what is the role of the editorial in spirituality and religion, and is spirituality unedited religion?
Again, because of my critical background, I have trouble talking about spirituality as such because I'm like an Assadian. Like my deepest thing would be an Assadian anthropological mode of critique, right? So the category itself seems to me suspect. So I would be a bad answer to that, but the editorial part, I mean, people can do it. Bless, you become Bono. Bono's not nothing. Bono produces a thing that he produces. The thing that he produces is distinct for me in kind from the thing that Prince produces. Whether I would call that religious or spiritual, I don't know. I don't know if those terms would handle it, but the term you use very precisely, I think, editorial, would be part of it. Prince, the person, could have had a million editorial positions, whatever. But the songs were just unbounded by them, in part because of his impulse toward this, again, wild syncretism. But that's a great clarifying distinction. I don't know that I would parse it as religious spiritual because I'm anxious about that division, but I absolutely take the point, like, these are different models. And as an impulse toward the editorial is one of them. Or an impulse that in Bono editorial means calcifying toward certain pre-given roles. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
All right. I'll ask a not even half-baked, quarter-baked question based off my good friend Chad's question. And he and I had conversations about Bono and Bono's image and iconography late into the night in Denver years ago. And so one of the things I'm thinking about now is the role of consumerism in all of this. Bono, I mean, when I talked about Chad's book on Bono with him, it was shortly after I had finished grad school. I had this part-time job in a Hallmark store. And some of the items that I stocked were part of the Red campaign thing for AIDS. Obviously great. Bono was a huge part of that. Like there was a consumerism element there. And I'm a woman in my mid-30s. I know I'm on the younger side in this room. And I love Prince. And as we were talking about Prince, I couldn't help but not also think about Taylor Swift.
Oh, yeah. I have an answer to this question.
Everyone laugh. Like, it's fine. I'm cool with that. I'm strong in my identity. But one of the things I'm thinking about then is the role of consumerism in all of this. Bono didn't create the Red products, but he's a huge part of them. T Swift has her own thing, re-releasing her masters, the world tour, blah, blah, blah. Prince, I mean, again, I'm a child of the early 80s, which means I don't remember the 80s. I don't recall him having like that same consumerism presence. That's why I said like it's a quarter-baked question in the sense it's not even a question. It's just like, hey, Pete, consumerism.
Dude, the short answer to this question I got was I was giving a reading in Berkeley the other day, and a person said, so Prince is the least secular rock star. Is the most secular living rock star Taylor Swift? That's obviously right, yeah? And I was like, that's correct. That's not hate about Taylor Swift, but that is a person going into every available category and filling it up to here with her person and her marketable image. That's like, and like, I'd like 1989, perfect record. Red, perfect record. Do I like things after that? I do not. But whatever, that's a thing to fight about. But that's not the question. the question is like I just love it so much. Like a person named Mark Goebel, he's a professor of English at Berkeley, just said to me, it's Taylor Swift, right? And he like snapped. He just got, that was just super correct. Like, think about it. Every available idiom in which she might be consumed, she is expertly, with a fluency that no one can match, filling with her person. Like Drake does something like that. But again, available idioms of consumption. And she's right there. It's magic. It is magic. Like it's not, this is a different thing. This is a to me, a different thing. That's what I would say. Without like, that makes this good, that makes that bad. I have a dog in that fight, obviously. But, you know.
What I love about this, part of me, like, I'm just going to jump the line and keep going. What is that difference, do you think?
Oh, that's
like,
just.
That's one of the things I'm just like,
yeah.
what's the.
Easy. Prince is like Emerson. Prince is allergic to the languages of apprehension, you know? Prince is allergic to the offhand languages of apprehension. He can be in relation to them, but he's always bewildering them and exhausting them. And the exhaustion is part of what you hear. Taylor Swift is like, I'm going to find them and I'm going to nail them. And no one in the history of sound will have done so as doggedly and precisely as I do. And that's would be for me the difference. We're probably going over time.
I hesitate to say this in a room full of brilliant scholars, but we have time for a short question. Pamela.
Very short. So Taylor Swift is of this moment and of this moment of mediation and consumerism and capitalism. Prince is of a different moment. Does that have any? How does he use the tools of mediation of his time? I think those are.
I think that's right.
questions.
I think he was not a less capitalized or less mediated time, but his relation to mediation was just much more fraught. And there's a lot of things we could say about that. He definitely felt himself, rightly or wrongly, though I think rightly, to be part of like a long line of exploited black musicians whose relation to the institutions of mediation was super vexed. Taylor Swift, again, God bless her, is not that. Like again, Bless, 1989, but like that's like billionaires making billionaire songs. Like I have a deep version of that because she is like locked right into that. And Prince had a tenser relation to what you've just described perfectly as like the available mechanisms of mediation. I think that tense relation is part of his impulse to beguile and then bewilder. Like the Super Bowl thing is just amazing. Like at the Super Bowl, and he just shatters it. Like there should have been, my theory, there should have been no more Super Bowl halftime shows after that. They should have been like, well, that genre is exhausted, and now we're done. But that's a great question. Thank you all very much. Penny, I want to say thank you very much for having me. I feel very grateful that you've been here. I think you were a student of Northwestern. I also was an undergraduate at Northwestern, where I fell in love with, who did I fall in love with? I fell in love with people talking about Prince. So I was close to Minneapolis. Thank you very much. Everyone, thank you very much for sitting through this. I appreciate it very, very much. Tracy, thank you enormously.
Thank you, everyone. I just have to do my closing boilerplate. But I just want to say, I love everything that you said, but I think what is sticking with me now is your point that for those of us who are trained in sort of a mode of being critical of secularism, critical of religion, spirituality is not a safe place for us to land, but where we are least cynical about spirituality is when we're listening to great music.
Yeah,
and
ravished.
That's certainly true for me as well. I love it that you said that. Thank you. We will have a little reception afterwards. I think Alex is at that room there. Yes. Oh, amazing. I want to thank...
Alex, thank you so much.
I want to thank our incredible staff for all of their help, and especially Alex Brooks, who has just gone above and beyond. Please go to our website if you want to know more about what we're doing. That would be great. Show up again. We would love to see you again. And thank you so much, Pete Coviello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.